Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Thank you for joining us for today's live Q&A.
Thank you.
We'll begin with a pertinent and a topical question. I'll finish the entire question. If I need to clarify, I'll clarify again as well. One of the latest clips going around is that you say the Quran has no prescribed punishment for homosexuality. Can you explain what you mean by prescribed punishment, as the Quran does mention the people of Lut being punished?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This question was asked to me in Toronto during the course of the 10 lectures for Muharram. Now the question was about homosexuality. I made it very clear that it is haram and not allowed in Islam, and that the Prophet categorically did not want his community to indulge in such practices. Then the question came about the punishment of homosexuality. In the Quran, when you look at the punishment of homosexuality, there is no prescribed punishment. By prescribed punishment, what we mean is Allah sets forth a particular punishment and gives its limits and definitions. So for example, God talks about the male and the female thieves, and he says, cut their hands off. Or talks about the couple committing adultery, that flog them 100 lashes. In this way, there is no prescribed punishment for the act of homosexuality in the Quran. The punishment in the Quran is discretionary, فَآذُوهُمَا. If we take that verse to be indicating and gesturing at the act of homosexuality. So there is punishment, but that punishment is not prescribed, it's a discretionary punishment. Now obviously anybody having studied a couple of years within the religious seminary would be able to make a distinction between prescribed and discretionary punishments. So obviously I was relying upon the knowledge of the listener, and of course I clarified that to my audience, but the intelligent listener that would then hopefully listen to the questions and answers beyond the immediate audience. Now that clip omits altogether the discussion in which I say that the Prophet did not allow homosexuality in Islam, that heterosexuality was the only form of life that the Prophet condoned and ordained. By condoned I mean allowed, and not condemned, because some people say when I say the Prophet did not condone it, they understand that I'm saying that he did not condemn it. Of course, homosexuality was condemned, not condoned, and heterosexuality was condoned. Now, as for the people of the Prophet Lut, now there, if you look at it, no ulama will use that verse to say that the punishment of homosexuality is stoning to death, because that chastisement befell the people of Lut. We will have to evidence it through different sources, either the verse that I just mentioned, فَآذُوهُمَا, or the hadith literature. But in the Quran we will not use that verse. Why? Because that verse is not talking about categorically the punishment of homosexuality, it's talking about an adab from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now think about this carefully. There were women in the people of Lut, and indeed Nabi Lut's wife herself was killed in that chastisement. There were children as well. Now these women were not homosexuals, obviously. The children were not homosexuals. So we cannot source the punishment for homosexuality from those verses primarily. Some people might wish to do that, but as a supporting evidence. However, it too would be a little difficult, because condemning to death is a very, very big thing in Islam, and it's not to be taken lightly. And punishments like these, if we want to ascertain that there are certain such punishments, then we would have to source them very, very accurately. Now, in the case of Nabi Shu'aib, I think, his community was not ethical in their transactions. And Nabi Shu'aib is constantly reminding them that be righteous in your transactions. In any case, that was one of their great moral inadequacy and transgression. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the punishment overtook them, the chastisement. Amongst all the other crimes that they were committing, this was a very prominent crime, a very unjust moral system of transaction. Now, does that mean that when somebody cheats somebody else in transaction, that you kill them? Nobody will source such a punishment from this verse for unethical transactions. So that's all I was trying to say at that point in that Q&A session. And the other thing was that the West has somehow gotten hold of this thing that the Prophet was very harsh and barbaric in the punishments that he gave, and that the Quran is very primitive and barbaric. So I had to also clarify that the Quran does not have such punishments. They might be sourced from other sources, but definitely not from the Quran.
Thank you very much. So we've had a follow-up question, and you may have covered it previously. As you mentioned, there's a lecture. I'm sure that's available online as well. So the question is, what should our approach when covering and discussing homosexuality in our community be? The video which is being referred to in the previous question took parts of a lecture which you mentioned which was in Toronto. But what would your opinion be on how we should be covering this topic?
Well, if I remember, recently there was a communication from Ayatollah Sistani, who did recommend that we ought not to reject people of different sexualities. And I think there might also be an implication that we ought not to condemn them. What I say here is that these are the challenges that we are undoubtedly facing. We can't bury our heads within the sand. We need to acknowledge that these are challenges that we have. We need to open up a little and maybe discuss what is the way forward. How do we need to think about it? Retaining all the time that Islam does not allow it. Maintaining that it is something that the Prophet did not allow. Maintaining that, and it is not to be celebrated. But at the same time to acknowledge that, look, there is something like this that needs to be discussed at a very mature level, and we need to initiate those discussions.
So is that again your personal opinion on how we should deal with it as well?
Well, I feel that we need to discuss it. When we begin to discuss, inshallah, Allah guides, and we come to some clearer understanding of how now to go forward. Because it is difficult, it is tricky for the faithful when they are faced with these challenges. But what makes it more difficult is that we do not face them properly and don't discuss them properly and adequately.
Thank you very much. So we are taking live questions. That follow-up question was live, so you can submit these live questions online. So as and when we do get them, we will look through them and we'll ask them when the appropriate time comes up. So the next question is slightly more direct, quite slightly direct. Are you against the Murajiyat system? So when it means system, it could mean the scholars themselves, the seminary. Obviously, you are involved in the running of a seminary yourself as well. So can you first of all maybe explain your background and historically how you've been involved in all of these different educational experiences, and then just state whether you are or are not against the Murajiyat system?
Very briefly, I studied under Marhum Mullah Asghar and Sheikh Zafar Abbas, then went to Iran and bought a house. So about 3 to 4 years I was at Madrasa Sayyid al-Khui, then I went to Qom and continued for another 3 to 4 years, and then I studied under Ayatollah Amini for 10 years. So that's my brief background into Islamic studies. And I completed my studies and I've written my theses and they are available for people to see. That's my brief background. Now, taqleed is a rational necessity, it's inescapable. It's a human convention, and within our understanding of the fiqh of Islam, we have to follow or refer to one who is understanding God's want from us. And that is what makes that individual a marja, a point of reference. So of course I'm not against them, and I'm not against the system. In principle, it is a rationally substantiated system. We can't go against it. What I do say, however, is that these phenomenal grand scholars of ours have served a phenomenal purpose. But as with all things, we need to evolve and we need to go beyond. The world is no longer confined to the Middle East. The Muslim world has spread to the four corners of the earth. There has been technological advancements, there have been medical advancements. People are now sharing cultures. A new world is taking birth. There are newer transactions, newer understanding of ethics, so on and so forth. Now here what I say is that the time where a single individual was a marja is now becoming a bit difficult. We need to have institutionalized marja'iyya, where there is more accuracy of understanding how God wants us to ethically, morally and spiritually fare in our day-to-day lives, how we need to interact with others in this global human world of human rights. How do we understand them? So what I'm saying is, it's no longer right in this part of the world to say that we can marry and consummate marriage with girls who are 8.5 years old, or that we can marry with them at a much earlier age and then maybe fondle them. This constitutes pedophilia. This is also already in the Tuzul Masail, if we can find there in the Arabic works of the contemporary scholars as well. We can no longer say that marital rape is allowed, because that act of having a right to be with one's wife without her consent in this part of the world it constitutes marital rape without her consent. We can no longer say that a woman does not have a right to divorce. And of course, when it comes to religious dues, there has to be accountability. I mean, if Hussein ibn Ali Salamullah alayhi said, when Bay'ah was demanded of him, he said, Ya aballah lana dhalik wa rasuluhu wal mu'minun, that Allah does not allow this to me, nor does His Messenger, nor do the believers and the faithful. Hussein Salamullah alayhi gestures at the three-way responsibility. Responsibility to God, responsibility to the Messenger, and responsibility to the faithful. This is what I'm trying to say, that we need to evolve now. These things need to be institutionalized. Imagine the amount of wealth that the community can give. And if this wealth is utilized accurately, invested, imagine how it can alleviate poverty, raise the living standards of the community. Imagine how we can better our own community and the broader community through this wealth and through a system of full accountability. So of course, marja'iyya is a rational necessity. But what I'm saying here is that the individual marja'iyya has done a phenomenal job historically. But that was because the world was much more confined, the Muslim world. Now our world has no boundaries or borders as such. The challenges are different. So here we need institutionalized marja'iyya or institutions. Now Quran also gestures at that Prophet, not everybody can come to you. So why do they not come to you, a few people? Learn, go back, and then warn their respective communities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might be gesturing here at the relativity, at how different people understand different things and how different people face different challenges. And their challenges are distinct, and they have to provide the answers for their challenges as distinct responses from the challenges faced by other communities. And I do not think it requires that much of deliberation to understand that indeed that is the situation, that in our world we are facing different challenges in different regions, and at times there are global standards that we have to adhere to. I mean, girls do not mature at the age of 8.5 so that they can bear all the responsibilities of a grown adult. That might have been the case in the prophetic society where the Arabs used to mature far quicker due to their environment and their lifestyle. But as time has moved on, things have changed, and the Imams also have gestured at this in their own instructions to their Sahabas when they were asked. So I am not against Marja'iyah, I am all for Marja'iyah, but all I feel is that Marja'iyah needs to evolve with time. We need expert input from beyond the Muslim scholars as well.
Okay, so leading on from that question.
And sorry, what I mean institutionalized, I mean collective ijtihad, that many minds come together with different perspectives and different understandings, because the whole role of Marja'iyah is to appreciate accurately the want of God. And the more the minds with the greater knowledge base that come together, the greater is the sense of accuracy, and accuracy is what it's all about.
So I can appreciate your answer. Thank you for explaining that. But is there a practical and a viable alternative? You've just touched on it, but if you can expand on what the viable alternative is. Because as you can imagine, there's many who think calling for change may be perceived as you being against the Murajat. So you've stated categorically that you're not against the system or any individual, but is there a viable alternative? Because you are calling for change.
Well, people like Ayatollah Mutahari, Ayatollah Baqir Sadr, from the best of my recollections, and others did gesture at a form of collective ijtihad amongst the ulama. We at Al-Mahdi Institute, we have initiated the Center of ICCI that will obviously be launched, and we've already spoken about this at our last graduation ceremony, that we have a group of scholars together with a group of experts who deliberate on issues of contemporary concern, and through consensus or majority opinion we come at a view. But we also, of course, are true to the minority view as well, but the views are then presented with their rationale, so that the people who are referring to these views know what the rationale is for those views, and therefore they are consulting more than imitating. So this is a small endeavor that we have started. We hope that with the growth of the global community and coming together of the collective intellect globally in different places, that these endeavors will be replicated in other places as well, and maybe at some time in the future we can all come together as one institution that is centralized and also is particularized. But of course, as with everything, it takes time, and we need to take our small baby steps to get there.
So that was very interesting, because this is not something which is new then. This is something which has been previously mentioned and called for, and you're not alone in calling for this change and even presenting a viable alternative. So this is something which has historically been called for?
Historically it's there. It has its roots within the thinking of our own noble ulama, says Ayatollah Mutahari, may Allah bless his soul abundantly, and Ayatollah Baqir Sadr, may Allah bless his soul abundantly. I think we have just taken it a step further by saying that it should also have the input of, an equal input of experts in the field of any issue that is being discussed. And also the religious scholars that congregate should come with different methodologies of ascertaining the same texts and ascertaining their meanings.
And is this initiative you've also touched upon, founded with credible input? So not just yourself, but other members of the community?
There are scholars on board, of course, and there are some of them are of name and repute, but obviously I would not like to mention their names until we launch it officially.
Thank you very much. So the next question is around Azadari. Again, another topical question. Are you against Azadari, and in particular the walk on Arba'in and Ziyarat? And obviously you know what this is referring to. And maybe perhaps use this chance as to reiterate something you may have previously said as well.
Of course I'm not against Azadari. Azadari is our lifeline. Azadari is to display the warm affection and love that we have for beloved Imam Hussein and others, the Prophet and his beloved progeny. And this is something that cleanses and purifies the soul and the heart. Without a doubt, it is most therapeutic and most uplifting for the soul. It makes us into refined beings. It brings about a sense of altruism, charity, forgiveness. It has all these positive connotations attached to it. However, Azadari has two components to it. One is of personal show of devotion or communal show of devotion for the beloved Imam Hussein. And the other one is expression of the message of Hussein ibn Ali. I say we should look at this in two ways, as public practice and as private practice. In the public sphere and the public space, we should not do anything in way of azadari that is not understood accurately by the onlooker who does not understand Imam Hussein. So we cannot do anything in public that puts the onlooker off. In public, the azadari should be geared in accordance with the sentiments of the onlooker and the best way in which we can convey the beautiful message of Hussein ibn Ali, of the value of justice, standing against oppression and tyranny, the value of determining your own destiny and not to be dictated upon, the value of human morals, the value of God centricity, that's spiritual, inclining towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in a private space that is not open for public viewing, we are able to display our gestures to Hussein ibn Ali in variety of ways. And I'm not against organized gestures of display in azadari, provided they are in private space. And provided in that private space, nothing is done that is contrary to the teachings of the Quran or the Prophet or the blessed Imams. That is my view on azadari fundamentally. Ziyara, I myself frequently go for ziyara. Yes, I go to my mother's grave, and my grandmother's grave, and my sister's grave. Yes, that is ziyara of my own. Hussein, the blessed Prophet, Imam Ali, Lady Fatima, they mean more to me than my mother and my father and my children and my sisters and my brothers. They are the ones for whom I live and they are the ones for whom I die. I frequently go for ziyarah. I'm not against ziyarah. The walk of Arba'in, what I was trying to say there is that yes, walk and every gesture that you have for Hussein ibn Ali is rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My only concern in that talk was, and if you hear the full talk, is that do not make ceremonies symbols of Shia faith, because they are not symbols of Shia faith. We have so many things that have cropped up in Shia Islam that has been seen as the symbols of Shia faith, but they are not symbols of Shia faith. As a result, the onlooker is dismissive of the Shia faith and is not taking it seriously, whereas the richness of the teachings of the Prophet and his family, of the wahdaniyah of Allah, the beautiful relationship that Allah has with us. There are wonderful spiritual teachings in the form of their du'as. There are wonderful virtues, their moral teachings, their social teachings, their teachings on how a state ought to be organized. There's teachings of how to interact with the other. These are the gems of their teachings that benefit humanity at large are being lost. So when we have Shia Islam that is composed now of so many ceremonies that come in the name of Islam, this is becoming problematic because by the day they are increasing. And I was just asking people that look, your genuine gestures are to be respected and appreciated, but the scholars should now say to people that these cannot come in the name of Shia Islam. They ought to be our personal gestures of devotion, Do not make them into religious practices or do not give them religious identity. Now people often ask me, are you against the ziyarah of Arba'in? I am not. I merely said that Arba'in, by our scholars' testimonials, is not something that is verified. Ayatollah Mutahari and others, and some recent ones as well, they've all discussed that did Lady Zainab get to Karbala on the day of Arba'in? Lady Zainab Salamullah alayhi was taken to Kufa. Ibn Ziyad wrote a letter and dispatched it to Yazid, awaiting a reply as to the fate of the captives. Yazid said, send them to me. Then they went there, they stayed there for a month, so they could not have possibly gotten back to Karbala on the day of Arba'in. Then comes the story of Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, Ridwanullah alayhi. By the time the news of the martyrdom of Hussein ibn Ali reached Medina, and by the time he would come from Medina to Karbala, would exceed the amount of days between the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and the 40th, 20th of Safar. So both of these seem very, very unlikely by our ulama. Now, if we have a narration that Hazrat Jabir met with Hazrat Zainul Abidin Salamullah alayhi and Lady Zainab Salamullah alayha in Karbala, then it would have to be concluded that it was after Arba'in. Not denying that they might have met in Karbala, but it would be after Arba'in. These are the deliberations of our scholars. As far as the hadith of the ziyarah of Arba'in is concerned, we have prominently two hadith. One is from the 11th Imam that Shaykh Tusi quotes in his Tahdib, and one another place in which he, in his Misbah. Now here the ulama comment that there is 200 years of gap between the 11th Imam and between Shaykh Tusi quoting that hadith. And Shaykh Tusi does not provide any of the links of the chain of narrators that lead up to the 11th Imam. And that is why the ulama do not give credibility to that hadith. And of course, those who do give credibility to it through different sources, they reinterpret it. Then there is the hadith of the 6th Imam Salamullah alayhi, in which he says to Safwan bin Yahya that when the sun rises, pray this ziyarah. Here the ulama argue that there are three narrators and reporters in this hadith whose credentials cannot be established, and as a result we cannot trust this hadith. So all I was trying to say here is that the occurrence of Arba'in needs to be authenticated, and the hadiths around particularly the ziyarah of Arba'in need to be authenticated. I mean, you have hadiths around the ziyarah of Arafah, ziyarah Ashura, nobody's going to dispute that. But the ziyarah of Arba'in needs to. Now, of course, go and do ziyarah of Hussein ibn Ali Salamullah alayhi at any time, it's mustahab. So go on the occasion of Arba'in and do the ziyarah of Hussein ibn Ali Salamullah alayhi, that's perfectly fine. But that was not what I was dealing with in that particular sort of session that I had. And as far as the walk is concerned, Allah rewards people for their beautiful gestures. My only concern is that by not being critical, we might end up doing great disservice to the Islam of the Prophet and the Islam of the best of man after the Prophet Ali ibn Abi Talib and his grand progeny. That was all that I was trying to say, but I'm all for Azadari.
So, thank you for that comprehensive answer. You mentioned two different things, and you mentioned the word symbols and the creation of symbols. You used the word distraction. You mentioned the word disservice. What would you say to someone who asked, do I engage with these things? Because I can't determine whether or not this is going to have an effect on the onlooker, whether that's in regard to Azadari, or whether that's someone who's actually planning on going to Arba'in in the coming weeks and doing the walk. What would you say to both of those individuals?
If somebody wants to go to Arba'in, walk in the next few weeks, I would say by all means go. Serve the people. But please have a look at the poor people around Karbala. Whilst you are there, use the opportunity to create awareness of those poor people who are living in that poverty around Karbala, and do something for them. Make that walk for Hussein ibn Ali a genuine walk for Hussein ibn Ali, which you are, but enhance it by serving the lovers of Hussein ibn Ali. Make it into a useful walk. Do not walk for the sake of walk. Walk for the sake of Hussein. To say that in this walk, I will open my mind, my heart to the truth. I will become like Hussein. Don't come back swearing and cursing. Come back refined souls. When you are there, know that as you eat, people around the Karbala of Hussein are starving, many of them. They are in such despicable condition that it is embarrassing and painful. Do service to them as well. As far as symbols are concerned, I think every heart intuitively knows when to put the brakes on and where. So leave it to that intuition of the individual.
Thank you very much. So the next question, and it maybe touches on some of the words you've used around authentication. So one of the things that has irked many people is by you saying 80% of Shia Islam is wrong. Can you expand on this? And can you imagine that this is quite a controversial sort of statement to make? And is there some responsibility in making such a statement?
I said 80% of Shia Islam is wrong and 80% of Sunni Islam is wrong. What I'm saying here is that which is giving Shia Islam its identity. What is Shia Islam as opposed to Islam? What is Sunni Islam as opposed to Islam? That identity marker of Shia Islam, yes, I believe majority of it cannot be verified. So you look at the Shia and Sunni theology, their understanding of prophetology, Sahabi, Imamology, you will find that a lot of it is inconsistent with the Quran. If you look at their understanding of the Quran, the nature of the revealer, the nature of the revelation, and the nature of revealed upon, you will find that a lot of it cannot be substantiated. If you ask them about their assumptions around the Quran, its eternity, its universality, its face value appreciation and its application to one and all, you will find that you cannot substantiate that. If you look at their history, the Sunni Shia history, you will find that you can knock holes into majority of the claims that they make in order to substantiate their position as opposed to the position of the other. This has led to a lot of sectarian tension and violence. If you look at the du'as, you will find our mujtahids such as Sayyid al-Khuy and other grand ulama do not agree with these du'as and their authenticity. If you look at the ziyarat that we have in our Mafatihul Jinan, you will see that our ulama are saying that no, these cannot be proven to be authentic. And then there's another problem, that a lot of the content may be inconsistent with the Quran. If you look at the particular fiqh that both the sects have, I'm not talking about the obligation of prayer. Obligation of prayer is the obligation of prayer. But the timings of prayer, as Sayyid al-Khuy will also say, Maghrib, praying it sometime after the setting of the sun, is amongst the symbols of the Shia. But this symbol does not mean it's obligatory. It can be in its mustahab. So the way we have taken it. So if you look at everything that gives identity to Shia Islam and Sunni Islam, we will see that it's questionable. I'm not talking about Islam. I'm talking about the identity markers of Shia Islam. I'm talking about the identity markers of Sunni Islam. All these practices that we have, the variety of sufras that we have, the a'mal that we have, these can not be through assurance be verified. The du'as that we have of Ramadan, are they authentic? Do we have to do this much this and this many rakats here, so on and so forth? These need to be authenticated. So the hadith literature now, You've heard this, I think it's become quite famous, that when our great scholar Ayatollah Makarim and others commissioned a research on the authenticity of Biharul Anwar, the 110 volumes were reduced to mere 10 or 6 volumes, 6 or 10 volumes. And 100 were deemed to be as things that whose authenticity could not be established. They might be authentic, but we can't establish it. Similarly, somebody did research on As-Sahul Kafi, how much of Kafi is most accurate, and from what 15, 16,000 hadiths we were down to 4,000, 5,000 or 6,000, I'm not sure. But the number was brought down substantially. So all of these things are there, and I would hope that we are able to conduct these discussions very, very, very openly.
So can I ask you to differentiate between the statement, the question states, you said 80% of Shia Islam is wrong. You've again used the word authentic or reliable. Does that mean when something's not authentic or reliable or can't be determined as authentic, that it is wrong?
Very good point. So here, what I'm saying is, Shia Islam is in the minds of the followers. If it cannot be authenticated, then to commit it as Shia Islam is wrong. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes? So for example, praying a particular dua as Shia Islam ordained by the Prophet and his family would be wrong. So in the SSF we had this whole issue of Dua Nudba, that actually it never existed in the narrations of our Imams. It came much after the occultation of the 12th Imam. To say that this Dua Nudba is an identity of the Shia in terms of being ordained by the Prophet and the Imams would be something that is wrong. Yes?
So does that mean we can't recite that dua, or it'd be wrong for us to recite that dua?
Well, my take here is that if you were to say, recite that dua, and then you say, okay, recite the other dua as well. Now what if the other dua has got content that is inconsistent with what the Quran is saying? So for example, Ziyaratul Jami'ah. The ulama quote this particular example. Sayyid Fadullah used to quote this. In Ziyaratul Jami'ah Kabira, it says that I bear witness to the Imam, basically addressing the Imam, that the creation will return to you and they will give their accountability, and their accountability will be with you. We're saying that to the Imam. Now the Quran is saying, indeed, to us is your return and your accountability lies with us. And the Quran is questioning Isa salamullah alayhi, did you do this, did you say this? So when you see this particular caption of Ziyaratul Jami'ah Kabira, you will say, actually it is inconsistent with what the Quran is saying. That if the great Isa is being questioned by Allah, then similarly Allah is going to question everybody. He is going to question the prophets as well. Allah says in the Quran, the day in which He will gather all the prophets and He will say to them, what was the response you got? So how can anybody's return and accountability be to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So then when you say, okay, now recite this, then you will have to have a yardstick again to say, okay, recite this one as opposed to this one. Do this amal as opposed to that amal. So now, when we go into sajda and we say, Ya Fatima tu aghithini, or Fatima, assist me. Now, intuitively, you will know that in sajda doing this act can become very dangerous in what it does to the mind of the devotee. Or recently there was another tasbih that came out to go into sajda, or I don't know, without sajda, but I think it was in sajda, to say, Ya Hasan aghithni. Then to contrast that with Imam Sadiq's dua that he recites after the ziyarah of Hussein salamullah alayhi, in which he says, Allahumma, O Lord, I have done ruku for you and sajda for you, because ruku and sajda cannot be for anybody but you. Now we can respond, we say, oh, the sajda is for Allah, but we are calling Lady Fatima in that sajda. You can see here how dangerous things can become. That we are moved away from that God-centric vision of the Prophet and the Imams. What I say here is that if it cannot be established that the Blessed Prophet or his progeny has committed themselves to a particular supplication or a particular practice, then we should understand that that does not constitute best practice. And if we are told by the Quran that you indeed have a prime example in the Prophet of Allah, if you desire Allah and the hereafter, then what that means is that we should try and curtail our devotional activities and practices to that which is authentically supplied by the Prophet and his progeny, because they are the prime examples in reaching Allah. So let us move away from precarious grounds and stand on sure grounds to be assured God's centricity and salvation.
And is that your own personal opinion? Because again, you've mentioned there's scholars who have looked at Bihar and reduced the amount of volumes. Is that the recommendations of other scholars who have looked at this kind of reform?
I, through my understanding of Shia Sunni faith, have come to an understanding that it's going to be very, very difficult to say that these faiths with their identity markers are authentic for the most part. You get dismayed when you first encounter these truths. You get dismayed. But if your commitment is to the Blessed Prophet and his family, then you're able to then overcome it, as difficult as it may be.
So I can see you appreciate that may be difficult for anyone to actually take that information on. I want to move on to another question, and we don't have a substantial amount of time left, but I do want to just continue with the topic. It's again a very direct question. Do you believe in the 12th Imam as a being, and what are your proofs for him?
Ask that of every scholar now. I ask you to do that. This place is known as Al-Mahdi Institute. At the time when we had Madrasa Sayyid Al-Khui and Madrasa in the name of other ulama, I refused and I said, no, it will be on the name of the father of the human community, the Blessed One and the Most Blessed One, that great man, Al-Mahdi. Mahdiism is an ethos of humanity. Mahdiism as a person is the glorious end of humanity. There is Mahdi, the grandson of Bibi Fatima and Imam Ali, who is the son of Imam Hassan al-Askari. I believe in his existence and his occultation. Now what are my proofs? I have a very different proof for him. The hadiths from Imam Sadiq onwards talk about cosmological signs prior to or concomitant with the reappearance of the 12th Imam. Now even if somebody says that what if these hadiths are fabricated, I will say, look, from the Safavid period onwards we know that these hadiths were recorded at least. If you can't prove their recorded state from before that, which we can, but I'm saying for the sake of a skeptic. Nobody 500 years ago would have had such a vivid imagination as to put such cosmological signs. So when the Imam says, before he comes you will see each other in the palms of your hand, then if the first part of this hadith, which is seeing each other in the palms of your hand, is mobile communication, if that is proven to be accurate, then the next part, that's when the Qaim will reappear, has to be accurate. Because nobody could have imagined such a fantastic thing of seeing each other in the palm of their hands. Similarly, the cosmological hadith that the sun will stop dead center in the sky, it might be a scientific invention of an artificial sun, I don't know. And then a face will appear inside it and will say, Al-Mahdi has reappeared. Nobody could dream up such things. And if now these are becoming scientific possibilities, that eventually this might happen, that the earth might just change its axis, because science has proven that hadith says that yes, the sun used to rise from the west, from the east, and set in the west. Because the Sahabi said, Yabna Rasulullah, the sun rises from the east and sets in the west. You are talking about the sun rising from the west, rising from the west and setting in the east. He said, don't question me, it used to happen before Adam, and it will happen again before the Qaim comes. So if the first part of the hadith is scientifically sound, then why shouldn't the second part of the hadith be sound? So if you look at these strands of such hadiths, they become such a firm rope that is unbreakable and unshakable, and to me it constitutes decisive evidence. So I don't go on to historical evidences, which is all suspect to criticism, which is all open to criticism. People will say, well, you have these narrations, and in the counter you have these narrations, and then you have these narrations, so on and so forth. So I say, no, my method is a very different one. When I talk of Mahdi, I talk about him in a way that gives me certitude that that great man is, and he will come, and he is the greatest of man that the world has ever seen.
So to clarify, you are arguing for the existence of the Imam, and you have your own proof as well.
And I'm saying
your
also,
own
if somebody watches our videos of Sims with our Sunni brothers, when they tell me, how can he disappear in the Sardab and live? I said, look, the Quran says the people of the cave are alive and asleep. You believe that. What's so difficult in believing this? Please go and refer to my videos and see how our discussions flow with our brothers of Ahlus Sunnah when they show skepticism about Mahdi. Salamullah alayhi. So yes, I do believe he's a person, and he is in occultation, and he will reappear, undoubtedly.
And I think that's a brilliant end to this Q&A. I would like to ask you one final question, if you can direct us to where all your videos are, and where we can look at them as well.
So some of my lectures are on shaykharif.com, and my written works are there as well, and transcriptions are there as well. Some of them are available, some of them are in need of being edited. At the same time, you can go to Al-Mahdi's website and you can find many more discussions, especially the discussions that we have under the banner of SIMS, Center of Intra-Muslim Studies. And they are very enlightening because we talk about the controversial issues, not shying away from the controversies.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shaykh. Thank you for your time.
God bless. Thank you.